We're here tonight to celebrate George Saunders. Now that's where the applause should come in. Who holds the 2023 Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. The prize honors an American literary writer whose body of work is distinguished not only for its mastery of the art, but also for its originality of thought and imagination. The award seeks to commend strong, unique, and enduring voices that, throughout consistently accomplished careers, have told us something essential about the American experience. Previous winners of the prize include Don DeLeo, Louise Erdrich, Toni Morrison, Marilyn Robinson, Philip Roth, Colson Whitehead, and last year, Jessamine Ward. This year's winner, George Saunders, is the New York Times, and I love saying this, the New York Times best-selling author of 12 books, including his novel, Lincoln in the Bardo, which won the 2017 Man Booker Prize. And he also appeared at the National Book Festival last August, and I'm thrilled that he's back here with us tonight because we ask each prize for American Fiction honoree to write a lecture on any topic related to fiction. So George is going to come to the podium in a few moments to deliver that. And after we hear his talk, he will be in conversation with the library's distinguished and wonderful head of poetry and literature, Mr. Rob Casper. Can we give him a hand? Now, George is the recipient of many honors, including fellowships from the MacArthur Foundation and the Guggenheim Foundation and the PEN Prize for Excellence in Short Stories, and he is a professor of creative writing at Syracuse University. But we are pleased to add to that list the library's singular honor for fiction writing. So please, George, could you come up so we can hear more from you?
Good evening. How are we doing? I want to thank the Library of Congress, Dr. Hayden, Clay Smith, Rob Casper, and all of you for being here today. Do we have any Story Club members? Yeah, thank you. Okay, good. So I want to talk about the importance of fiction, as to us culturally, socially, philosophically. But to do that, I have to kind of start with the smallest possible unit, which is me and mine. Not that I'm saying I have the smallest possible unit, but I want to kind of start with my process, as pathetic as it is. So I grew up in Chicago. I didn't really know any artists. I had one uncle who worked at R.R. Donnelly and was a jazz guitar player and had an earring, so that was about as artistic as we got. And I didn't really intend to go to college, but I had this big plan. I knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy in the Eagles, and so we were just going to open for the band that opened for the band that opened for the Eagles, supposedly. So luckily that plan fell apart. But I had a couple of teachers, Joe and Sherry Lindblom, who saw something in me. I don't know what exactly. And this being the 70s, they actually managed to get me into college on the phone. They called the School of Mines and said, this guy's kind of a screw-up. His grades don't show anything, but we think he has some merit. Would you let him in? So the Mines said, well, if he goes to summer school and gets a B+ average in 18 hours, we'll let him in. So I did that, showed up at Mines, and I remember the moment when the woman looked at my transcript and said, wait a second. And then she vanished into a back room and came out and she said, okay, you're in, So not an auspicious beginning. But I fought my way through, was a geophysics major, kind of oil exploration stuff, went to Asia, and all along I had this kind of desire to be a writer, and my hero, of course, was Hemingway. And I thought, if I could just get somewhere exciting, and I'll just have all these adventures and basically type them up. That's being a writer. I've been a little bit, one of the books that really moved me when I was younger was Atlas Shrugged, which I now abhor. But at the time it was, but at the time, it was a book. It was 1,000 pages, and there were rooms and people. And it was one of the reasons I went to college, actually. Just reading that book, I thought, I want to be smart. I want to walk around with a sweater and discuss stuff. But in Asia, I kind of went over there a little bit, Reagan-esque, I guess. And then I had a big night. I was out drinking and walked by a hotel that was being built. And as I stumbled by, I looked down, and in that pit, there was something moving. What is that? I looked down, and it turned out it was about 300 senior women, older women, Malaysian women, clearing the site by hand, literally carrying boulders by hand. And something clicked in me. I had a lot of working class roots, and I thought, oh, maybe Ayn Rand has got it wrong. These don't seem to be like lazy people sucking off the system down there. So something clicked that's never clicked off, thankfully. So at this time, I'm trying to write. I'm doing a lot of Hemingway imitation, Hemingway in Sumatra, of course. And I had a girlfriend in Denver, and we used to get our mail in bundles. So we'd get 4 or 5 weeks worth of mail in one bundle. So the first letter said, I love you so much, faithful forever. And the second one said, I love you. And the third one said, I met someone. And by the 4th letter, she was living with this guy, So I think, I've got to go reclaim it. So I at that time, to go to the airport, you had to take a ferry boat on this river. So I'm there at the waiting station, and I think, this is really dramatic. I'll write about this someday. I should swim in that river. So I swam in that river, and I was paddling away, and about 2 minutes in, I look up, and there's a pipeline, an oil pipeline, and all these monkeys shitting down into the river. And I thought, I wonder if this is okay. And it was not, and I got deathly ill, and was sick for about 2 years. And it was something like being, I'm guessing, 98 years old and very ill. I had to sleep like 15 hours a night to feel decent. So anyway, this uplifting story. So I came home, and then I started kind of trying to do the things that you think a writer should do. So I was a doorman in Beverly Hills. I worked at a slaughterhouse in Amarillo. I worked at a convenience store. I was a roofer. And one night, just kind of by chance, I had a dream of a certain literary voice, typed the story up, and applied to Syracuse with it. And it was just crazy enough that it kind of worked. Very non-Hemingway-esque. Got into the program, got a call from Tobias Wolff, who's my great hero and mentor. And he invited me to come study at Syracuse, so I did. And then in the romantic Syracuse ambiance, I met my wife, Paula. We got married, got engaged in 3 weeks, which I think is still a record there. And so I thought, this was it. I'm starting my writing life. And at one point I said to Toby, that first story I sent was so silly and funny and sci-fi. And now I'm going to write some real fiction, meaning Hemingway-esque fiction. And Toby, who is a very wise man, just looked at me over his glasses and he said, well, good. Just don't lose the magic. Which is exactly what I did for about 7 years. We had 2 children. I was working as a tech writer in Rochester, cranking out these Hemingway-esque things set in different places. Rochester, for example, Amarillo, Nick walked into the Walmart. It was pleasant, So I knew something was wrong, but those of you who are artists will know, you can know that something is wrong and not be able to fix it. All right? You can know your method is not good, but that doesn't mean that it will miraculously yield to you. So I just kept cranking these things out. I remember thinking, the boat that is my dream is leaving the harbor. And the world, not only did it not care if I wasn't a writer, it kind of seemed to prefer that I not be. I had responsibilities. So at one point, a good friend of mine was getting married in Mexico. And Paula said, you should just go to the wedding. I'll take care of things here. We scraped up the money. went to Mexico, and it was a novel waiting to happen, my friends. It was, there was a radical Catholic priest in the wedding party. There was a male model / surfer in the wedding party. There was a guy who just gotten out of jail for drunk driving in the wedding party. It's an exotic setting. So I came back and I said to Paula, you are sitting on a gold mine. Just let me do this thing, you know. So for the next year, I would stay up late. I would just drink 2 pots of coffee and write this book. And then when I fell asleep, I would kind of stumble to bed, get up to go to work. This is like a year or something like that. And at the end, I had 700-page masterpiece called La Boda de Eduardo, which basically means Ed's wedding. And that's what it was. It was Ed's wedding filtered through James Joyce plus Hemingway. I was very tired, so there were sometimes not so many verbs in it, just like but I really thought, you know, it was a manuscript, and I still have it at home. It's a big old fat thing. So in the way that we writers do, I said to Paula, you know, no big thing, but I just finished my novel. Would you mind looking at it? No rush. She said, oh, yeah, I'll read it. So I left the room and, of course, immediately stood in the doorway, peeking around. And I looked in, and she's maybe on page 3. And she's sitting like this. Because she knew what that book had cost us, and it was really quite unreadable, actually. It was a big concept that I had, you know, sort of demonstrated. So that was beautiful in a way. And again, those of you who are artists will know that there's a state of, sort of a holy state of despair that you get into when all of your ideas about art have been exhausted. You know, and we have ideas about art because it's so terrifying to not have them. You know, to be just free and spontaneous is terrifying. We want these ideas. So I was at the end of my rope, I passed it, and I went into work the next day kind of giddy with defeat, really. And there was a conference room where we sat. We do these conference calls, and my job was to transcribe these calls. And at that time, I had the same kind of hairline and a ponytail, which is not a look I really recommend, but I was tired. And so I was taking these notes, and I started just out of that state of despair, writing these little Seussian poems, kind of pornographic, a little scatological. And when I finished one, I would just draw a picture and flip the page over. And so by the end of the call, I had about 15 pages of these poems. And I almost threw it out, but something, you know, my ego said, oh, just keep it. So I took that home and just sort of carelessly threw it down on the table, went in to play with the kids, and a couple minutes later, I hear this incredible sound, which is Paula genuinely laughing at this work. I hadn't had a sincere, positive reaction to my work in a long time. You know, it was always, this is the deadliest phrase for a writer. People would say, yeah, I read your story. It was interesting. You know, oh, kill me. But she was really laughing from the gut. And so something kind of flipped on at that point. And it was just this idea that that being an entertainer was actually okay. I always did that in my real life. I was always funny. I always tried to, maybe a little too much, tried to get people to like me. But that humor had been totally absent from my work, partly because I felt like you had to be sort of serious in fiction. That, you know, laughing was okay for social occasions or a party, but for literature you had to be quite, you know, serious. But the relief of just thinking, of course, when we're attempting to make an artistic product, we should use what we're good at. We should use something that we have strong opinions about, that maybe actually powers us through our real life. So for me, that was humor. I felt in that moment like I'd been, you know, getting beat up in an alley, and then, why is this happening? And looking down and seeing that one arm was up behind my back, you know. So suddenly I felt really free to be myself in my work. So it's very a big moment. But it was, and so I went back to work the next day, and in that spirit, I wrote a story. And that story got accepted almost right away, and it became the first story in what would become my first book. Right away, I knew I was onto something because I had strong feeling about what I was doing. I wasn't sort of in the thrall of a concept. I wasn't planning anything. I was just trying to entertain. So it was a very wonderful moment, but also a very bittersweet moment, because the story was, it was mine, but it was kind of crappy. You know, it wasn't in the world of my heroes, of Chekhov and Tolstoy and Toby Wolf, but it was almost like I'd been kind of, you know, looking around, and there's a mountain over there, and it's Hemingway Mountain. I'll go up that one. So for those 7 years, I was trudging up Hemingway Mountain, and you get up to the top of it, and you see that Hemingway's standing there, and he's not giving up his spot. I mean, what are you doing up here? So even if I get really close to him, I'm always going to be Hemingway light. And so with that story, I thought, oh, of course, and I trudged down that hill, not doing that again, and looked over, and there's a little shit hill. And it's got a sign that says, Saunders Mountain. And mountain is misspelled, you know. But the very actually profound realization I had in that moment was, you've got to go stand on that mountain, because that's the only one with your name on it. Now you stand on it, you accept the humility of it, and you pray that through further hard work that mountain will grow. And maybe someday it will be a bigger mountain. But it was a bit like I had this, I told my talent, go get it, boy, and the dog ran out, and he came back with like the lower half of a Barbie doll. You know, the story was kind of sci-fi, kind of pop culture, but again, it was my story. Nobody else could have done it. So the method that I learned in that experience that I just told you about is the one I've used ever since. And it's so simple that it's a little embarrassing to talk about. But basically, it's just this. In my universe, the whole process of making a work of art consists of reading what you've already written and kind of imagining there's a meter in your head. And if you're in Story Club, you've heard this one before. But on this side of the meter is a P for positive. On this side is an N for negative. The whole practice is watching that needle. When it's in the positive, you're doing good. When it drops, our first impulse is to deny it. No, it was good yesterday. But professionalism or craft is saying, okay, little story, you just dropped into the negative, didn't you? And the story will go, no, I didn't. Keep going, we're good. I said, no, what's wrong? Why did you do that? What's wrong? And if you kind of, I think of it as parenting a story, it's okay, what's wrong? Tell me. The story will say, well, I'm kind of boring. To which you say, oh, you kind of are, aren't you? Yeah. Well, can you tell me, like, where do we think you're boring? You know where, page 3, right there. Yeah. But at that point, we can do something about it, right? You can do whatever your heart tells you to eradicate the boringness at that particular point. So that's really been kind of my whole approach to fiction. And I had this kind of validated in a very weird call with Bill Buford, who at the time was the editor of The New Yorker. And we were working on a story of mine called Sea Oak. And we got into kind of a last-minute editing wrangle, and he was, you know, making a lot of changes. And my ego had me blurt out, Bill, what do you like about this story anyway? And he got really quiet, and he said, well, I read a line, and I like it. Enough to read the next. The end. That was the editor of The New Yorker's entire ethos of fiction. I read a line, it propels me to the next. That encapsulated my experience 100%. And the beauty of this is, at least the way it works for me, is if you do that, everything else takes care of itself. The stuff we worry about in writing seminars, character, theme, an arc, politics, all that stuff, it all takes care of itself. And conversely, if you don't take care of that, if you write a line that stops the reader, nothing happens. She puts down the book and goes to watch a movie. So the great anxiety-reducing element of this is that I feel if I just concentrate on the individual phrases and sentences, the whole kingdom will open up. I'm not sure that it works for everybody. I think it works for everyone a little, but for me, that's the entire gateway. And of course, it makes kind of a strange carryover effect into real life. I mean, aren't we always doing that? Coming into a moment, trying to evaluate it with a quiet mind, a mind that's not full of projections and defensiveness, and then based on what we perceive, acting. You know, so for me, it was kind of a beautiful thing to realize this. And as so often happens in life, once I had this realization, I found evidence that other people had had it as well. And I'll give you just kind of my three golden mantras that I stumbled on. One was Donald Barthelme, who in a beautiful essay called On Not Knowing, said, "The artist is that person who, embarking upon her task, does not know what to do." Opposite what we often think. We often think the artist has an intention and then drops it on you like a manure truck, you know, sit there and take my wisdom. Barthelme is saying the opposite. The artist is the person who, embarking on a task, does not know what to do. Gerald Stern said, and I'll clean this up a little bit because we're in such an august room, but he said, if you start out to write a poem about two dogs making love, and you write a poem about two dogs making love, then you wrote a poem about two dogs making love. And Einstein, as he always did, took it up a notch, and he said, no worthy problem is ever solved in the plane of its original conception. So this means, as artists, if we know what we're trying to do and we do it, we're a drag. Now, why is this? Think of it in terms of a date. You go on a date. It means a lot to you. You want it to go well. You're anxious. So you prepare a set of index cards. 7 o'clock, ask about her mother. 7:15, compliment shoes, you know. Now, why do you do that? Because you care. But you also do it because you're afraid of meaningful contact with the other. You don't trust the other, and you don't trust yourself, so you create a system to sort of insulate you from genuine connection. Fiction is the opposite of that. And I would just say, next time you're reading a book and you drop it in disgust or boredom, see if this works for you. I think it's because you feel the writer on the other side not fully respecting you. It can happen in a million different ways. If a writer says, the cat jumped up onto the black table, the ebony expanse, the dark-hued planar surface. About the second phrase, I'm feeling a little disrespected. So you edit out the second two, and suddenly that respect is restored. So my whole editing process has come to be a very obsessive process of trying to make sure that you, the reader, knows that I love you and I respect you. And I would never try to pull a cheap trick on you, even on the level of the phrase. That's the idea anyway. The subtext of this is that I assume that you're as smart as I am, as worldly, as compassionate, as well-intentioned as I am. So this means that we are in an intimate, ideally, an intimate, spontaneous conversation imbued with mutual respect. That's the goal. And it actually does, in my daily practice, inform every edit that I make. And it's sort of become a little bit, I guess, automatic. So when a story is written this way, how can we understand it? To me, a story, when I'm writing at my best, I'm imagining the story to be kind of like a roller coaster. I'm a roller coaster designer. What do I want you to do? I want you to get off the roller coaster and go, holy shit. I don't really care if you say, it seems to invoke the Pyramid of Cheops. I don't care. I want you breathless, I want you moved, and I want you connected with me on the things that matter. I want to be talking to you about the things that are keeping you up at night, the things that you would live and die for. A second related idea is I want you to go into this big sort of black box I've made and have an experience. What kind of experience? I'm pretty open. I want it to be intense. I want it to somehow change you, and especially I'd like to wake you up. Now, I don't mean that in a condescending way. We're all asleep half the time. But I want to wake you up in the sense of having that communion between the two of us. I want you to walk out into the world and go, wow, I forgot. I forgot about this world. I don't really care too much what you feel, but by the time I finish the story, I know where I want you to feel something. That's part of the editing design as well. Now, why should we want to do this thing? It's such a strange thing, especially, as I say, in times like these, where so much is at stake and so much seems insane. Why would we want to spend time reading a work of fiction that the writer has declared in advance is entirely made up? But if you're here tonight, you know how powerful it can be. I think fiction does a number of things. The best thing it does for me is it reminds me that my mind isn't the only operative mind. That even though you seem like different people, you're just as real as I am. Fiction is a process of making us remember that truth that we all know. I also feel, after I read a powerful work of fiction, an increased confidence in my ability to imagine your experience and to understand that it's actually not that different from mine. It's on a continuum at any rate. You know, if you do something I can't understand, I could get there. And the process of inventing a fictional character helps me imagine the experience of someone not myself. When I was young, I was a pretty devout Catholic. And the first idea I ever received about Jesus was that Jesus was kind of this vastly compassionate novelist, you know, who could just amble up beside you and go, I know you, you know. And he would regard you so openly with so much affection that he wouldn't omit any data points. That's how I aspire to be as a novelist. I want to, whoever I'm writing about, I want to get to know them so well, so openly that they give themselves to me all the way. You know, I don't know if you're like this, but isn't it the case that when somebody cuts you off in traffic, you always know their political party, right? Except you don't. You know, so that is really, for me, one of the things that fiction does is it makes you be slower in judgment and less attached to the judgments that you happen to make. It's an incredible gift to open someone up that way. It also, when I read a story, it reminds me that things could be other than they are in my life right now. You know, at a certain point in life, you feel that if everything's going well, we tend to think that that's because of our virtue and that misery has been eliminated everywhere. Fiction reminds us that it's otherwise. Chekhov said, every happy man should have an unhappy man in his closet with a hammer to remind him by his constant tapping that not everyone is happy. Fiction can do that for us. So this weird activity of inventing stories actually is not that weird, it turns out. Neuroscientists now say that we're actually novelists in every instant. And here's what they mean. Let's say that you have been blindfolded and forced to come to this lecture, which may have been the case for some of you. And then I take the blindfold off. What happens in your brain instantaneously is, and this is weird, at the back of your mind, this process starts, there's a rough draft of this moment. You say something like, oh, public space, seats, people. Then as your senses start to work in a rapid fire way, you add data, elaborate, beautiful building, balding older guy in a suit droning on. Oh my God, I'm at a literary talk. But instantaneously, your mind has made a rough draft, revised it into specificity. And we're doing that in every single instant. Every perception we have is exactly that, which is why we can sometimes get things so wrong. You know, that's why optical illusions work, but it's also why we're in error. We see a garden hose and we think it's a snake. We see a snake and we think it's a garden hose. So fiction really, for me, has become a very beautiful way, maybe the most beautiful way of looking at this thing called the mind, that I'm a prisoner of in every moment, and kind of learning it. It's almost like having the user's manual about my own projections and my own limitations as a thinker. So it's a beautiful life, and I'm grateful to have a creative life, but actually every life in this spirit is a creative life. When we, I think the goal in working on a piece of fiction or in living is to be in every moment sort of going anew, what's happening right now? Where am I? What am I supposed to do? We get habituated. We already know the answer to those questions, but art can sort of simulate the process of having those questions asked anew. So, you know, if we say, in one extreme, we say, I know what this is. I know what this moment is. Oh, God, this again, you know. That's no good. It's also not that great to say, oh, this moment again. I know what this is. In both cases, what you're doing is you're eliminating the actual data in favor of a habitual position. Art is the very opposite of that. It's sort of an anti-propaganda mechanism that can, if we do it correctly, it can urge us to a kind of freshness. So I'm very grateful to have this for a living. Very grateful to be able to talk to you a little bit about it. Grateful it's the Library of Congress, and I wish you all very long and happy lives full of art. Thank you. Bob, will you come up? Hello there.
George, hello. Thank you for that wonderful talk. Thank you for the audience, all of you, who, many of you who had to wait outside for a good long time until we opened up the second door. Thanks for your diligence. I couldn't be more thrilled to talk to you. And I wanted to begin in part because in preparing for this interview, this conversation, I read A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, and then thought about how you pull apart the Russian stories that you're talking about. And I wanted to do a little bit of that activity with the description of this prize. Dr. Hayden, in her introduction, talked to you about the prize. I'm not going to read the description again, but we thought a lot about what we wanted to honor in great fiction writers in creating this description. And there's so much in that language that I think relates to you. I first wanted to talk about the idea of a strong, unique, and enduring voice, and wanted to get back to that great aha moment that you described, in which you suddenly wrote Seussian poems with drawings. Of course, that was the start of your publishing career, and I wondered, what are the other aha moments that you had along that career, or what are the other moments in which Paula, your wife, actually laughed or had some sort of new response to your work?
Yeah. Well, I had one early that I forgot to mention, but I was in third grade in Chicago, and I was in love with this nun. I know we all know that feeling, and she pulled me aside one day, and she said the most magical sentence that anyone could say to a young Catholic schoolboy, which is, "We've been talking about you in the convent." What? What? I didn't even know you could talk in the convent. But she said, and she had a book behind her back, and she said, "I've noticed that you're a good reader. The other sisters aren't sure you can handle this, but I think you can." And she handed over Esther Forbes' book, Johnny Tremaine. And of course, it had a Caldecott medal, and I felt like I'd won the award, So I carried that around, always with the medal facing outwards. And I read it, and it's an incredibly high-level stylistic accomplishment. Forbes was a great stylist. And I'd never, I think, read sentences that had been that carefully made before. And I didn't know, of course, what to make of it, but I do remember vividly that the language, as it got in my head, and I started thinking in her language, which is very brisk and kind of actually Hemingway-esque a little bit. But I would go into the playground, and I would narrate in that voice. Yeah, it's sick. But it was, so that was really the first time that I guess I should have seen that I was a stylist. But that whole powerful suite of things that happens in reading, I would imagine I was him. Johnny Tremaine had spilled silver on his hand, so I would walk around with my hand inside my coat, But that was a big, powerful, and if I'd been a little wiser, I would have seen that was a writer's experience.
But did you have other moments in the middle of your career, say, when you suddenly thought, okay, I'm up against something that I don't quite know how to do, and then work through it in a way that was illustrative or awakening or what?
Yeah, well, there's one. I had written a lot of stories, and was very happy just being a story writer. Had done fine. And then, but I had this idea about this Lincoln story that I heard when I was here in D.C. And I gave myself kind of a 6-month free pass just to try it. I didn't tell anybody I was trying it. I just thought if it's a failure, no one will know. They think I was just, sloughing off. But so I wrote about the first 30 pages of that book and really didn't quite know what I had done, and I handed that to Paula. And again, remembering the earlier experience, but she had to go do something, but she sent me a note that I have never, I won't say what she said, but it was one of the kindest things anyone's ever said. And it was just that simple vote of confidence, like, yeah, this method works, please finish it. So that's invaluable when someone can say that. And she's done that so many times for me over the years,
What was it like to go back to stories after that?
It was okay. She also says to me, I'm not sure that's a novel. because there's a lot of white space in that baby, you know.
Yeah.
But in writing it, I had a moment where I thought, well, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I'm somebody who's been kind of making custom yurts all my life, little tiny structures. But one day I thought, well, actually, it's like if someone came to you and said, can you build me a mansion? No. Oh, actually, I can put a bunch of little yurts together, you know. So the technique actually wasn't, once you figured out the structure, it was a very similar approach to the one I described. Mm-hmm. So it didn't seem all that foreign, actually. And then to go back to stories was kind of a relief, because I always say to myself, a story doesn't have to do everything. It just has to do something, you know, which is sort of it's an anxiety-reducing idea. I can just get one nice moment, that's good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in this great long career that you've had, you've also gone through all sorts of personal changes and had all sorts of experiences. You've had children and become a parent. You've had this illustrative career as a teacher, and you've lived as a person in these times with all the things that have happened. And I wonder how that all might have impacted you. If you can mark certain changes in your work on the basis of, oh, this is what I learned to tell my students that then I applied to myself.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of it, as that method would suggest, a lot of it just happens without you sanctioning it or approving it. But having said that, Flannery O'Connor said a person can choose what he writes, but he can't choose what he makes live. So for me, the funny stories that first got me through the door, that was a big surprise, and it was a great. Suddenly, I actually had a career when I hadn't had one. But I think I feel a tension all the time between a certain darkness that comes very naturally to me, and a certain joyfulness that also comes naturally to me. The joy, I think, is harder to get to in fiction. I'm not sure why this should be, but somebody said happiness writes white, meaning you write a good day and it doesn't cohere. Nothing really happens. So I see a big struggle as trying to not sacrifice the truthful part of the humor, which is, we're all going to die, and yet we have to do our taxes, and we have hemorrhoids. I mean, that whole human struggle, So not losing that, and especially I think in our country, where people work really hard, and they're not necessarily rewarded in proportion to their labor. And that whole thing, a lot of my humor comes from a sense of outrage about this. Okay, I don't want to lose that. But I also don't want to be someone who doesn't appreciate how beautiful it is here. So that's, for me, the big struggle. Lincoln and the Bardo was a real step in the right direction for me. I can kind of do that. But every book is that struggle again. Ideally, my dream would be to write a book that perfectly balances that the way that it's balanced in our hearts. Do you want to quit living? No. Well, kind of. Yeah. So that's the goal, and I think it's happening sort of, incrementally by the process I described.
Yeah. Now I'd like to turn to originality of thought and imagination.
I'm loving this.
This is my little. It felt like my assignment after reading the book. So you talked in your talk about short stories as a wild ride or a black box, and in the book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, you also describe stories as little machines that contain gas stations. Mm-hmm. And so, because I'm partly a poetry guy, I wanted to just talk to you about why you turn to metaphor and what metaphors offer you in trying to understand what is this thing that you've created.
Right. I think it's because nobody really knows. I mean, we do Story Club, and we talk all the time about how stories work. And one of the underlying principles is there's no one way. It's a little bit like that old definition of pornography. You know a story when you see one. But as soon as you start to do, which I'm always doing, as soon as you start to try to reduce that to a formula, you mess it up. So part of my teaching approach is to say, we're going to throw a lot of metaphors at this thing. Only accept it if it helps you. There's no point in coming up with the perfect metaphor for a story. Who cares? Only if it helps you do it better, you take it. If the metaphor dies at your feet, kick it aside. You don't need it. So I feel pretty free to just explain what it feels like to be inside a story I'm writing by throwing a lot of metaphors at the wall. Mm-hmm. And again, the only hope is that somebody out there who is feeling that eternal feeling of uncertainty in the great subjectivity of art will take some comfort. And it's not, oh, George told me an answer. It's, I already knew that. That's the best artistic instruction, is when something in you goes, oh yeah, you do that, I do that, great, you know. So I think my students, I say, what we're really trying to do as instructors is empower you to do the thing that only you can do. That's one. And second of all, weirdly, over the years, reduce your anxiety about the process. Now, it's not, I don't think it can be a totally anxiety-free process, but those of you who are artists will know that sometimes anxiety can shut you down completely. So a lot of what I teach is just, let me throw out some ideas. If any of them calm you and help you do your work, that's great. If not, just forget it. You know, take what you need and lose the rest.
Do you, at moments when you get stuck, turn to those metaphors or start imagining
No,
those metaphors?
no,
Not at all.
no. I mean, most of those metaphors are kind of retrospective, like, yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah.
The only one I really do turn to is that meter idea, which is just really, you know, the basis, I would say, of all criticism and art is to say, can I be in authentic relation to the artistic moment I've just had? Can I accept my mind's natural reaction to it? That's a big thing, because we're so encoded from school and from whatever with preconceptions about art. If you can just have a genuine reaction to it, assuming you're fairly well read, that's gold. If you're going to be a critic, you use that. So for me, that's the one thing I do, but it's not really metaphorical. Like when I go to work a couple days from now, I'm just going to pull the piece of paper in front of me and take a breath and read the first line. That meter comes alive, and then you're off to the races. So yeah.
I also want to just talk about imagination, and of course, you've described the job of a writer to imagine all the various components of a story, and use voice and use revision to kind of shape it into what you want. But I was interested to talk about writers such as you, who do so much incorporating elements of the imagined or the fantastical. And maybe you could talk about how far you've gone in the direction of incorporating the fantastical and how you sort of figure out, oh, this is a story that can start with a character waking up and his nose has become famous, become more successful than he, and that's where you stop in the fantasy of it and then sort of play it out.
I think I have kind of a built-in rule, and it's that we should never be weird for weird's sake. So there's two things. There's the story as it's being told, and there's the secret heart of the story, what it wants to talk about. I try to concentrate on that second thing, and I say to it, we're going to be modest realists, okay? And it goes, sure. Then you start to tell a story, and it says, I need a ghost. I did that in a different voice. I need a ghost, And if you're really paying attention to the story's secret heart, you go, all right, sure, we can do a ghost. I want to get you what you need. You put a ghost in. But it's very important, I think, that you not theoretically want a ghost or theoretically want sci-fi. You're doing it in response to the story's natural heart. So, for example, if I was going to write a story in this room, for example, somehow there are ghosts in this room. All the people who've been here before and aren't with us anymore. Some of them were here last year. Are they here? Well, no, except yes. If that story wanted that, then I'm going to put the ghost in there. There's one exception, which is a trick that I learned a long time ago with that first book. Is if I can find a voice that I like doing, especially if it's a kind of a strange, off-kilter voice, I will just do that voice all day, not caring about where the story's going. The sound of the voice is what is the currency. That story will sometimes veer off into something weird just because of the voice. But my main thing is let's not do point of view changes. Let's not do sci-fi. Let's not do ghosts unless that heart of the story says we need to. Then the reader feels it as necessary. It doesn't feel like, you're not feeling when someone's just showing off and you see it coming from a mile away, okay, talking shoe, sure, whatever. But if that feels earned, then I think you'll tolerate it. And so it's something like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So the description of the prize ends with the focus on our winners telling us something about the American experience. And I would love to have you respond to how you think your work does that, and what American experience do you think it describes or contends with?
Well, I mean, those early stories, when I wrote by that method I described, I found out, one, that they were more compelling. They were funnier, basically. I also found out that they were suddenly, in a way that the Nick Adams imitations weren't, they were talking about what was actually happening in my life, which at that point was work. I was working as a tech writer. Not exactly poverty, but pretty close, always one paycheck away. And that slow kind of grinding humiliation of Terry Eagleton said, capitalism plunders the sensuality of the body. That was happening. And it was in those stories. So, I mean, I didn't even know it was happening to me, but it showed up in the stories. That is something I'm still thinking about. Have we made, the perfect country? Do we have to work too hard? Do we really do this beautiful aspiration of inclusion that we talk about? That also is I hope is in my work. Mm-hmm. Just this idea that we have actually a pretty beautiful model for a country, really. I mean, think about that. Everybody is beloved. No matter what, everybody. The system is designed to make you and your loved ones feel beloved no matter who you are. Wouldn't that be cool, But it's a beautiful aspiration. Fiction I think sometimes describes the failures in that process. Mm-hmm. Where does drama come from? It comes from failures of love, mm-hmm. sometimes, So that's sort of my bigger project, is to do some justice to the trajectory that I followed in this country, which is complicated, a lot of levels. But to try to do that in fiction would make me happy if I could do it.
Yeah, it also though strikes me that some of your stories, love comes out of a kind of moment of failure, moment of spiritual failure, and it may be due to capitalism or due to the way in which the language has been kind of eroded into corporate speak or what have you.
Yes, I mean, I'm a Buddhist, and one of the things that I didn't know I was a Buddhist. I've been one forever, I think, but one of the ideas is that we are always, making the world with our mind. And one of the mistakes, sweet little mistakes that we make from the time we're born is, I'm central. I'm the star of this great movie. I'm permanent. All you poor people are dying, but not me, Really, those two, I'm permanent and I'm central. All the drama in life happens when the world goes, I'm sorry, but you're mistaken. You're not permanent, you're not central. That a lot of fiction comes from that moment where the ego that we so lovingly construct comes into conflict with reality. I mean, Lincoln, he has this beautiful boy, and unimaginably, the boy dies, and he's got to fight this war. Well, Lincoln had constructed his world, his ego. Reality said, I'm sorry, but I can't let you do that. So in that sense, there's a spiritual dimension to fiction for me, because you really are trying to create a beautiful, active, energetic ego in your character. And then, sadly, you have to have a train wreck. Mm-hmm. I have a story called Victory Lap, and there's a young girl, and that was one that I wrote out of voice. I just was having fun, remembering being 15, and she's kind of dancing around the house, having these fantasies. And at one point, just in the interest of making a funny monologue, she blurted out through me, to do good, all you have to do is be good. You just have to try. You just have to be brave. Which is something I believed as a 15-year-old. I looked around at all these divorced and drunk people, like, oh, God, get it together, If you want to be good, just be good. So she had blurted that out. Her sweet little ego had constructed that identity for herself. She blurted it out, and me, the big bad writer, has to go, oh, really? You think that's true? I do. Every one of us is a rainbow, she says. I'm like, all right, And then I introduced some menace. But like all stories, it's a moment of beautiful ego coming to fruition, which we can't help it. It's what we do. We're all doing it right this minute, And then the world says, you're mistaken. You're deluded. You're actually not permanent, and you're not central, And so it's sort of an inherently, I think of it as an inherently spiritual thing to make stories that are compelling and even funny, because it's funny, you know, when the arrogant person carrying a trophy falls down the steps. That's funny.
You've also said that the you in your stories is a better version of you too, and talked about, which you alluded to here, about the sort of power of the omniscient voice and what that means in terms of how you understand people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this person that I am, 65 years old, I'm kind of tired of him. Like, I know his shtick, and I know what he believes, and I know the facile examples he makes when having political arguments and so on. It's getting stale, you know. I've been doing this a long time. But in fiction, by that method I'm talking about, that person is not really the operative player. He starts out, beginning of the day, he sits down and, let's get this book written. But through this process of really just reacting to your own text in a very quick, spontaneous way, that person, I think he kind of gets bored and wanders off because he likes to be in control. And this is not about control. And one thing I didn't mention was I revise stories over and over and over. This idea of iteration is really important to me. So by the 800th pass through a story, making these small changes out of respect for your reader, the story has really taken on a mind of its own, and it starts doing things you had no idea about, and a better part of yourself starts to show up. Now, I don't mean necessarily more virtuous, but, for example, sharper, funnier, less repetitive, less dogmatic. And I've really had that experience of looking at the person, the narrator, and going, oh, wow, that's kind of me on my best day, you know? So this iteration is magical because it's a bit like if I gave you a hotel room, or gave you an apartment, let's say, fully furnished. How nice. You go in there, it doesn't really feel like your house, but, you know. But then if I said, okay, every day for the next 3 years, you can take out one item and replace it with something you like better. For 3 years, well, so you take that ugly clock, nice clock. You know. By the end of that 3 years, that place would be so saturated with you know, with your taste, with your glory, you know, that it would feel like home. That's what this editing is like for me. You know, the early drafts are not really me. And as you revise, it starts to sort of not only be more like you, it starts being like a you that you don't necessarily have daily access to, but only in that process. Yeah.
It's interesting to me too that you talked about respect for the reader, and you talk in the book about having strong opinions, that you use this language that is, in essence, the language of the art of a fiction writer, you know, the craft of a fiction writer, actually, in sort of moral terms. And I'm curious how that came to be.
Well, I mean, I think it is a moral activity in the sense, not in a propagandistic, because as I'm saying, if I have my leftist political position, somewhat left of Gandhi, and I use a book to prove that to you, you're going to walk out because that's boring. That's predetermined. And the same thing if I have a different political view. So it's the opening up to say, I don't know. Once upon a time, you know. And then the critical part is when I say, will you lean in with me and help me do this? Because I can't write a book by myself. I have to imagine you, and I have to say, fresh cut grass on a summer day. And you have to go, oh yeah, I got it, you know. Now, if I say fresh cut grass on a summer day, which as we all know smells like kerosene, you go, no, and you pull out. So this ongoing thing where I'm trying to lure you in by, and now this is where it gets a little bit touchy. I'm trying to lure you in by truth. Now, whose truth? It's the truth of specificity. Like when Tolstoy describes a peasant harnessing up a horse, he knows it so well, and the sentences reflect that certainty so beautifully that you absolutely believe it. And there's a horse. And you might even have a smell of a horse, even though the horse hasn't been said to have one yet, you know. That's the kind of truth that I think we can share. It's moral because it presumes your reality, you know. You're reading my book. I know you, I like you, I trust you. We don't know. I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. Let's go in a little more and see. So it's, I would say, moral ethical in the sense that it's based on curiosity and openness and a willingness to accept anything that comes back, you know. And also, I think it's really important on that shared, you know, one of the things that's so alienating about this moment we're in right now is that you feel like you're a little insane, right? feel like you're a little alone. All the old values are gone. People are hard to talk to. They're cranky, you know, whatever. Your list can be substituted in there. Fiction says, or let's say reading says, it isn't necessarily so. There's a space where we can go into a mind meld based on mutual respect, based on the idea that actually, neurologically, our brains are more alike than different. It's not, you know, if we all emptied our brains out right now, you couldn't find yours. You know, they're all there. So that means we have fundamentally similar experiences. Fiction banks on that. Now, it's not 100% true. I mean, obviously there's end conditions, but as a starting place, I think it's kind of a way, it's something that's gone out of contemporary life somewhat, although not in this audience, thank God. But that's a kind of a ritual reassurance, I think, if we could do. I'm becoming like a preacher about that.
I am, though, curious about where does the strong opinions come in? Is that in terms of just like, this is something that doesn't belong here, or this is something I need to push on?
You mean in a story?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just honestly, it's just a gut level revulsion sometimes. You know? Yeah. And also it has to do a bit with belief. You know, like if I want you to believe that these things are happening. And if I don't do it right, you won't, you know? So sometimes, and in the poetic sense, it's sound. You can say things one way and the reader, for some mysterious reason, is compelled through the sentence and an image results. Other times you feel the writer, and you go, I don't believe it. So it's compelling you to keep going. Oftentimes I find logical issues. I had a wonderful student one time, and she had a story, and the story was there was this couple that was so attracted to each other, but it was a forbidden love because he was married and she was the caretaker of a developmentally disabled brother who was an adult. So they couldn't quite get it going. So in the story, the man is driving by the woman's house on a sultry southern night, and there's the woman sitting in the porch light, and he pulls over and they talk, and the heat is just palpable. It was written so beautifully. And you could see that this moment, you know, in this story was looking to be possibly the moment when the couple consummates right there on the porch. And it was thrilling, you know, what? The brother's asleep in the next room, your wife is waiting for you. And at a critical moment in the story, that the writer had written, suddenly the teapot went off. Like, what? What teapot, you know? And so we kind of laughed about it. But the whole idea was her subconscious wasn't quite ready. She didn't know, based on the rest of the story, what was supposed to happen there. So her subconscious, that constant friend, put in a little to be continued sign. But when we hit that moment, to answer your question, everyone resisted it. Yeah. It was almost like, no. So you find that in your own work, and then you say very patiently, okay, little story, I'll take the hint. And then it's very, you know, can be pretty tedious. But once it's worked for you, if it's worked for you once, you develop a real taste for it, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah. You know?
Well, I'm going to ask George one more question. Before I do so, I just want to tell you two things. When this event ends, we're just going to walk out right there, and we'll do a book signing out in the foyer. As you walked in, you probably saw the books for sale. Our current Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction winner has departed from many of the other writers I've worked with in not having any stipulations on signing. So please treat him respectfully. Don't do something like asking him to autograph your belt, as once happened at a Jim Tate reading. Second, because we love you so much here at the Library of Congress, we're going to send you a thank you for coming to this event. Within that thank you, there will be a survey request. Please do fill out that survey. Seriously, we do read the surveys and change the kinds of programs that we do based on what we hear from you. You know we would like to have 2 entrances open at all times for Live at the Library Night, so you don't have to tell us that one. But anything else you want to tell us, please do. So my last question is really about the work you've done advocating for the art and the sort of problematics you've introduced in that. The Library of Congress has 2 literary ambassadors, the Poet Laureate, which is an esteemed old position, over 80 years old, and our National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, which is also esteemed but much younger. And we think of our winners, our Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction winners, in the same vein, at the same, sort of reach at the same level, and we want to honor them in that kind of way. But I can't think of a more powerful advocate for the art, a more powerful ambassador for the art than you. That said, in the end of A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, you talk about the problem with singing fiction's praises, the danger of that even, and I'm really curious how you reckon with that as you do that very work time and again, both in this book and in your Substack, and I'm sure as you talk about fiction with other people.
Yeah, I mean the danger, and in the book I mentioned Dave Hickey, who says, you know, if you are always saying fiction's good for you, first of all, that's a drag. I mean, if this is good for you, you know. But more importantly, if we make the case that fiction or the arts prove their worth by being virtuous, then Dave says some totalitarian comes along and says that guy doesn't seem to be proving his worth per my standards of worth, and then he gets censored. So what Dave says, and I agree with him, is that we ought to be a little bit gentle when we say what art does, because art has a right to do whatever it wants. It can be subversive, it can be naughty, it can literally do whatever it wants. The artist has to have that freedom. So I try to keep that in mind as I do these talks or do Story Club. The kind of great disclaimer is, I always tell my students, I'm going to put a parenthesis around the semester. When I start talking, for me to do my work, I have to be really persuasive. I have to try to sell you on this method of revision. I have to sell you on structural things, and I'm going to really be a preacher. For it to work, I have to make a hard sell, a charming hard sell, and you have to resist. But not mindlessly, but you have to resist genuinely. If you feel something's no good, just toss it aside. But I'm going to be preaching the whole semester, and at the end we put up another parenthesis and we write, according to stupid old George. And anything that sticks was already yours in the first place, keep it. Anything that doesn't, just discard it. So with that disclaimer, I feel like I can sort of advocate for it. I would also say, and I feel it so acutely when I come into gatherings like this, there's a core of people in our country who are thoughtful, energetic, really dedicated to the arts. They make a space for it in their lives. And here I'll veer off into pure opinion. That's the salvation of the country. People who are thoughtfully engaged in the arts, who are dedicated to sort of moving towards compassion and decency and use the arts as part of that program. It's very important, and I think it's very important right now that those of us in that category be vocal about it. We tend to be sweet, you know, we tend to be kind of polite, but when you think about this great American project, it really depends on, it depends on mutual respect and love. It depends on the idea of the beloved. We have to work at seeing everyone in our sphere, in our country, as beloved. If that's not literary work, then I don't really know what is, you know. So I don't mind being a little, I'll sometimes go overboard, and then when I go home, I just go, oh my God, who is that guy? Now go back to work and shut up.
Well, thank you for talking with us tonight. Thank you, all of you, for coming, and please buy some books, have George sign, and continue to check out his work. So please join me in thanking him.
Thank you so much for being here.